A life for a life. The county line operation that ended with bloodshed and the third side gang member, Zeno, getting stabbed multiple times as he's left with his insides falling out.
It's a drugs line. It tends to involve young people, often exploited, taking often large quantities of drugs from urban areas such as London out into county towns and to coastal towns.
Someone like my little brother's age, because that's the age I really started, 12, 13, 11, that sort of growing up, hitting puberty, like even the general public, they would never look at a young person and think, he sells drugs.
This story takes place in Norwich, about 100 miles away from London, a city in the eastern region of England and considered a quiet city for the most part. But with cities like Norwich, you tend to get more drug county line operations rather than gang violence. Before I get onto the story of Joe Dix, aka Zeno, I'm just going to give you guys a quick breakdown on what exactly county line operations are and how they work. I cover a lot of gangs and drill rappers in my videos, and a lot of these people will be involved in a county line operation at some point, because this is usually one of the methods that these gangs use to make money. An example of someone I've covered who got caught for this is LD from the 6-7 gang. County lines is basically a drug trafficking method where gangs, often based in cities like London, Birmingham or Manchester, expand their drug operations into smaller towns, aka the countryside. They use a single mobile phone line called a county line to take orders. These gangs often exploit vulnerable children and teenagers as young as 12 to transport drugs from the city to the county line and bring back cash. The teenagers, often labelled as runners, are sent to these cities by train, coach or taxi, or sometimes are made to stay in trap houses overnight. If this is sounding familiar, it's probably because you've seen some aspects of it in the popular Netflix series Top Boy. Just like the Netflix series, the gang will promise these teenagers money, status and protection, or even sometimes use debt traps to intimidate their runners into doing what they want. With county lines, they can also turn deadly, as you will find out in this video, because once a gang oversteps their boundaries, it can lead to stabbings, kidnappings and even murder. And someone who was involved in a county line operation himself is the main person of this video, Joe Dix. Joe Dix was born in Brighton in December 2003, but moved over to Norwich in 2004. He was just like any other kid growing up and took a massive interest in sports and was a popular kid in school. However, as a young teenager, he was exploited by a couple guys in his area into becoming a runner for their county line operation. This would become the turning point in Joe's life, as his behaviour and school attendance started to decline. He would start to lash out on people he cared about and would often go missing from home, likely selling drugs in the countryside. Joe, now being involved in county line operations, will start going by the name Zeno from the Third Side Gang. The Third Side Gang is an established county line crew in Norfolk. Joe had a reputation for himself, but in 2021, he'll get arrested and be convicted for supplying Class A drugs. You see, the problem Joe had was not that he got arrested, but it was the fact that the money and drugs he was carrying were confiscated by the police, which now left him in debt to the gang. Joe was allegedly kidnapped and beaten for this situation, leaving him seriously injured. Unfortunately, Joe was unable to escape this life, as he would go on to get arrested several more times. He would receive a YRO, Youth Rehabilitation Order, which gave him a home curfew. He also had a GPS tag fitted, which stopped him from entering certain areas of Norwich. With the new restrictions and rules in place, Joe was now starting to move in a better path, but it will only take one phone call for all this to fall apart. Cameron Palmer, Benjamin Gill and Hans B. Harry, part of the rival gang OTM, will hatch up a plan to rob the stash house of the Third Side Gang. The OTM members got wind of where their rivals were keeping the products and managed to get a key to the house on the block of flats. On the 28th of January 2022, the three members will now put their plan into motion and make their way to the flat in Vale Green, where the Three Side Gang were keeping their products. The group were able to get access into the flat, but when they tried the key to open the house door, it didn't work. They would try the key several times, even barging the door to get it open, but to no avail. But what the group didn't know was that on the other side of the door was a County Lines drug dealer who was hearing the whole thing happen. The drug dealer will call Joe at 6:48 p.m. and tell him that people were trying to rob the house and to hurry up and help him. Joe, hearing the whole information, will waste no time and start making his way to the Vale Green area with a fat machete. Whilst Joe was making his way to the stash house, the OTM members were on their way out of the flat building after failing to get through the door and rob the house. Joe Dix and the group will eventually spot each other, and this will now be the final couple minutes of Joe's life. The three teenagers will chase Joe for a couple minutes, and in CCTV footage, you can see Joe running for his life. In the footage, you can also see one of the members, Benjamin Gill, drop something, and when he bent over to pick it up, you can see him holding a knife in his other hand. The teenagers would eventually catch up to Joe and go on to stab him 7 times before running off. Joe was actually able to stand up after the attack and start stumbling in the direction of his flat. He won't make it far before collapsing, with his insides falling out, according to witnesses. Emergency services will be called and will find Joe laying on the ground with multiple stab wounds. He was rushed to a hospital but was already too late, and Joe passed away 1 hour later at just the age of 18. It was stated that the cause of death was hypovolemic shock and a critical stab wound to the torso. An investigation will now be launched into the death of Joe Dix, aka Zeno from Thirdside. Police will gather CCTV footage around the area Joe was last spotted, which is when they spot the OTM gang members making their way to the Vale Green estate and chasing Joe down the road before stabbing him. The police now had 3 faces and 3 potential suspects related to the murder. Further CCTV footage will show the teenagers making their way back to Benjamin's flat in Lefroy Road after the stabbing. They will then leave the flat 30 minutes later and make their way to a nearby shop, laughing and smiling like nothing happened. When information came out of Joe's death, the 3 teenagers will try to cover their tracks by burning all their clothes and the blade used to murder Joe. They would even throw all their phones into a river in order to get rid of any evidence. Forensic analysts would report back that all 3 phones dropped off the network at the same time. Cameron's phone was eventually recovered by the search and dive team, but the phone was broken and waterlogged, so it had to be dried out and reconstructed into a different phone before being able to access the device. The 3 teenagers will now be arrested. Text messages will be found on Cameron's phone showing that he organised the robbery. The task that the prosecution now had was to prove that the 3 OTM gang members were responsible for the death of Joe Dix. Court hearings will be spread out throughout the year, but on the 4th of October 2023, after 12 hours of deliberation, the jury will reach a majority verdict and all 3 teenagers will be ordered to stand up. Hans B. Harry's solicitor will argue that there was no evidence that her client participated in the stabbing of Joe, as you can't see him anywhere in the CCTV footage of the attack. 20-year-old Hans B. Harry was however found guilty and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years, and upon release he will be deported back to Mauritius. The solicitor for Benjamin Gill will try to flip the script and argue that the drug dealer who called Joe might have been involved in the murder and not his client. 19-year-old Benjamin Gill was found guilty and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. The solicitor for Cameron Palmer addressed the jury and argued that even though his client was a drug dealer, it doesn't mean he's a murderer, and that Cameron was not spotted with a knife in the CCTV footage. 19-year-old Cameron Palmer was however found guilty and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Because Joe, aka Zeno, was part of a gang, the rival gang would go on to mock his death along with sending threatening messages to his parents. They will vandalise Joe's memorial garden at Vale Green that the family set up. The Thirdside gang would now start plotting a revenge attack on the OTM gang for the murder of their member. A close friend of Joe called Alfie Hammett, part of the First Side gang, would be in contact with another gang called IP3 in order to get revenge for Joe's murder. A 19-year-old called Joshua Howe, part of a neighbouring gang, will also be involved, and they'll set their mark on an OTM gang member called Raymond Quigley. On the 17th of January 2023, Alfie and Joshua will travel to Ipswich Town Centre, patrolling the area looking for Raymond. You can watch CCTV footage of the pair going up and down the town centre with a bally on and a hood up and both hands in their pocket, concealing a weapon. Around 3:35 PM, the two teenagers will spot Raymond walking with two of his friends. Alfie will run straight at Raymond and start stabbing him multiple times, whilst Joshua pulls out a long blade and chases after one of the friends Raymond was with. The friend managed to escape to safety in a nearby clothes shop, and this is when Joshua runs out the shop and proceeds to sprint down the road. Alfie, who stabbed Raymond multiple times, will also run away in the opposite direction to Joshua. Following the attack, Raymond managed to stagger across the road to get help, but collapsed in a nearby shop. Emergency services would arrive shortly afterwards, but despite their best efforts of the public and medical team, Raymond died at the scene at just the age of 18. The First Side gang had now completed their mission, a life for a life. Another investigation will now be launched into the death of Raymond Quigley. There was a huge amount of CCTV footage of the whole attack, and CCTV footage of both attackers after the incident. You can see Alfie running down the street to a car park in which he switched out his grey tracksuit bottoms for black ones. The footage will also catch Alfie without his mask heading back home. Joshua's movements were also tracked after the incident, as you can see him walk down the road and start sprinting from time to time. Around midnight on the 21st of January, officers arrested Joshua in Oxfordshire, and 12 hours after, Alfie was also arrested on Rushmore Street. They were taken into police custody for questioning before being charged with murder 2 days later. Mobile phone analysis discovered that a series of phone calls were made before the attack, one associated with Third Side and the other with IP3. Within minutes of receiving these calls, both Alfie and Joshua left their house and made their way towards the meeting place near the college before launching their attack on Raymond and his friend. Whilst the trial was going on, it was found that Joshua had attempted to flee the country to Kenya in order to avoid arrest. The prosecution will piece together that the attack was in relation to the murder of Joe Dix, and that one of the gangs were getting revenge for one of their members, essentially an eye for an eye. 19-year-old Alfie Hammer was found guilty and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 24 years. Joshua Howe was also found guilty and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. Both these gang members were only 19 when they got sentenced, which is honestly just crazy. The county line gang beef has now ended with two teenagers, Joe Dix and Raymond Quigley, losing their life at such a young age. The other teenagers involved in their deaths will now spend their whole youth in prison over something that was completely avoidable. As you can tell, county lines are just as bad as gang violence and are very dangerous. It's very hard to leave once you become involved in this sort of stuff, because these groups will groom young impressionable kids into doing their dirty work. Growing up in London, I've seen this happen firsthand, and it's more common than you think. Joe Dix's parents have started a charity called the Joe Dix Foundation, where they educate both parents and children on the dangers of being involved in these county line operations. I do recommend you go check it out once you get the time. Like I say in every outro, if you take anything from this video, let it be that the gang life is truly not something you want to be involved in. You got family and friends that fully care for you, so stay smart and let me know in the comments if I missed anything. I'll see you lot in the next one. God bless.